Beauty stood in the lobby of JK Technologies at 7:45 in the morning, her first day as Director of International Marketing, and tried not to throw up. The building looked different when you weren't running through it in a panic searching for your missing children. More intimidating. More like the kind of place where people would immediately know she didn't belong. Miss Okonkwo? A young woman in a crisp blazer approached with a warm smile. I'm Hannah Kim from HR. Welcome to JK Technologies. Let me show you to your office. Office. Beauty had an office, with a door and a window and her name on a placard that Hannah was currently affixing to the wall beside the entrance. Director of International Marketing, Beauty Okonkwo. Seeing it in print made it real in a way that still felt impossible. The office itself was modest compared to Min Jae's executive suite, but luxurious by any standard Beauty had known. A proper desk with dual monitors, a comfortable chair, bookshelves waiting to be filled. And that window, not floor-to-ceiling like Min Jae's, but large enough to let in natural light, looking out over a section of Seoul she'd once walked through at night after her cleaning shift, never imagining she'd view it from an office like this. Your calendar is already loaded with meetings, Hannah explained, pulling up Beauty's computer. Mr. Kang wanted to make sure you had time to settle in first, so nothing is scheduled for today except a brief orientation at 10 and a team introduction at 11. Your direct reports will be direct reports? Beauty interrupted. I have people reporting to me? Hannah smiled. You're a director. You'll have a team of 5. 3 marketing specialists, 1 data analyst, and 1 regional coordinator. They're all excellent. A bit nervous about the new leadership, but that's normal. Nervous about her, Beauty realized. About whether the CEOs... What was she exactly? Baby mama? Ex? Future something? Whether she deserved this position or was just warming a seat because of her connection to Min Jae. I'll prove myself, Beauty said quietly, more to herself than Hannah. I'm sure you will, Hannah said kindly. Mr. Kang doesn't make hiring decisions based on personal relationships. If you're here, it's because you earned it. Now, let me show you where everything is. The morning passed in a blur of orientations, introductions, and information overload. By lunch, Beauty's head was spinning with passwords, protocols, and the names of at least 30 people she'd never remember. She was sitting at her desk, staring at her computer screen and trying to make sense of the marketing analytics dashboard when someone knocked on her open door. Min Jae stood in the doorway, looking unfairly composed in a dark suit. How's your first day? Beauty gestured helplessly at her screen. I'm drowning in data and acronyms. What's a CTR? And why do we have 17 different metrics for engagement? Min Jae laughed, actually laughed, and stepped into her office, closing the door behind him. Click-through rate. And because marketing people love making side or simple things complicated. Want help? Don't you have CEO things to do? I'm taking lunch. And teaching you our systems counts as CEO things. He pulled up a chair beside her, not across the desk in a position of authority, but next to her, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Okay, let me show you the dashboard I actually use. The rest is noise. For the next 30 minutes, Min Jae walked her through the analytics, explaining what mattered and what was just performance theater for board meetings. He was patient, thorough, and genuinely seemed to enjoy teaching. Beauty found herself relaxing, asking questions, even making a joke about the absurdity of tracking micro-conversions. You're going to be good at this, Min Jae said when they finished. You see patterns. That's rare. I see Excel sheets and panic, Beauty countered. That's everyone's first month. But you'll figure it out. You figured out how to raise 2 genius children in a foreign country with no support system. Corporate marketing is nothing compared to that. The compliment landed somewhere in Beauty's chest and settled there, warm and unexpected. Thank you. For the job. For believing I could do this. I didn't give you the job, Min Jae said seriously. The hiring committee did. I recused myself from the final decision specifically so no one could say it was nepotism. They chose you because you were the best candidate. Beauty stared at him. You recused yourself? Of course. I wasn't going to let anyone question your qualifications. He stood, smoothing his jacket. Now I actually do have CEO things to do. But Beauty, he paused at the door. I'm glad you're here, not just for the company. I'm just glad you're here. He left before she could respond, leaving Beauty sitting in her office, heart racing, wondering what exactly had just happened. The weeks that followed were brutal. Beauty threw herself into the work with an intensity that surprised even her. She studied market reports until midnight, learned industry jargon, built relationships with her team, and slowly, painfully slowly started to prove that she belonged in that office. Her first presentation to the executive team was a disaster. She fumbled through slides, lost her place twice, and could feel the skepticism radiating from the older executives who clearly thought she was there because she'd slept with the CEO once. But she took the criticism, revised her strategy, and came back 2 weeks later with a campaign proposal for African market expansion that was so thoroughly researched and creatively executed that even the skeptics had to nod in approval. "That was impressive," Minjae said after the meeting, catching her in the hallway. "The Nigeria digital strategy especially. Where did you learn about mobile money integration?" "I grew up there," Beauty said simply. "I know how people actually use technology, not just what the market reports say. And I have cousins who would happily consult in exchange for proper compensation." Minjae's eyes lit up. "Cultural consultants. That's brilliant. Why didn't I think of that?" "Because you're Korean and male and have never had to navigate being foreign," Beauty said bluntly. "No offense. None taken. That's exactly why I hired you." He hesitated, then added, "Do you want to grab dinner? To discuss the expansion strategy, and maybe African market consultants." Beauty knew it wasn't just about work. She could see it in how Minjae looked at her lately, in how he found excuses to stop by her office, in how their conversations had started extending past professional topics into something more personal. And if she was honest, she felt it too. That pull, that dangerous attraction that had gotten them into this situation 5 years ago. "I should get home to the kids," she said, even though Chidi and Amara were probably doing homework and wouldn't miss her for another few hours. "Right, of course, the kids." Minjae nodded, professional mask sliding back into place. "Another time." But as Beauty walked to the elevator, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just missed something important, or maybe avoided something dangerous. She wasn't sure which. The turning point came 3 months into her tenure during a late-night work session. The company was preparing for a major product launch targeting African markets, and Beauty's team was behind schedule. She'd sent everyone home at 8, insisting she could finish the final report herself. She was deep in market penetration analysis when Minjae appeared in her doorway at 10:30. "You're still here," he said. "Launch is in 3 days. This needs to be perfect." "It's already perfect. You're chasing diminishing returns." He came in, closing the door behind him. "Go home, Beauty. The kids need you. The kids are at the penthouse with a babysitter. They're fine." She didn't look up from her screen. "I need this launch to succeed. I need people to stop wondering if I deserve to be here. People already know you deserve to be here. You've proven it 10 times over. Have I?" Beauty finally looked at him, exhaustion and frustration making her reckless. "Or am I just the CEO's charity case, the single mother he felt guilty about?" Minjae crossed the room in 3 strides, his expression intense. "Is that really what you think? That this is charity?" "I don't know what to think anymore," Beauty admitted, her voice cracking. "I'm grateful for this opportunity, for everything you've done for us, but I'm also terrified that I'm going to mess it up, that I'm going to prove your mother right, that I'm just some Nigerian woman who trapped you and is now leeching off your success. My mother is wrong about everything," Minjae said fiercely, "and you need to stop letting her voice live in your head. You're brilliant, Beauty. Your campaign proposals are better than anything our previous director produced. Your team respects you. The board is impressed. You're succeeding not despite your background but because of it. Because you see things the rest of us miss." Beauty felt tears prick her eyes. "Then why do I still feel like I'm failing? Because you're exhausted. Because you're trying to prove something that doesn't need proving. Because..." Minjae stopped, seeming to struggle with something, then continued quietly. "Because I've been distant and you've interpreted it as disapproval when really, I've been trying not to cross professional boundaries and mess this up for you." Beauty's breath caught. "Mess what up?" "This. Us. Whatever this is." Minjae ran his hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she'd never seen from the composed ice prince. "I want to be more than just the father of your children, more than your boss, but I don't want to make you uncomfortable. I don't want people to think you slept your way into this position. I don't want to ruin what you're building here." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Beauty stood slowly, her heart hammering. What if I want more too? Do you? Min-jae asked, and there was vulnerability in his eyes she'd never seen before. Or is that just proximity and gratitude? Beauty thought about the past 3 months, about how she looked forward to Min-jae's random visits to her office, about how her heart jumped when she saw him in meetings, about how she'd started noticing small things, how he rolled up his sleeves when he was thinking, how he listened with his whole attention, how he was gentle with their children in a way that made her chest ache. I don't know, she said honestly. Maybe it started as gratitude, but it's not just that anymore. When you explained those analytics on my first day, when you defended me in that board meeting last week, when I see you reading bedtime stories to Chidi and Amara. She stopped, surprised by how much she'd been paying attention. I think I'm feeling things I shouldn't feel for my boss, for someone I barely know but also know better than I should. Min-jae stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. What if we stopped fighting it? What if we admitted that what happened 5 years ago wasn't just a one-night mistake, but the beginning of something that got interrupted? That's probably the worst idea we could have, Beauty whispered. Probably, Min-jae agreed. The board will have opinions, the media will have a field day, your team might question your authority. My mother will absolutely lose her mind. So many reasons not to do this. So many, Min-jae echoed. But he was leaning closer, his hand coming up to cup her face with a gentleness that made her shiver. Tell me to stop and I will. Tell me this is just work and I'll keep my distance. But Beauty, I need to know if you feel this too. Instead of answering, Beauty closed the distance and kissed him. It wasn't like 5 years ago, when everything had been heat and attraction and the electricity of strangers discovering chemistry. This was different. Slower, deeper, weighted with everything they'd been through, everything they'd survived, everything they'd built together without meaning to. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Min-jae rested his forehead against hers. That's probably going to complicate things. Definitely going to complicate things, Beauty agreed. But she was smiling, really smiling, for the first time in months. The kids are going to have opinions, Min-jae said. Beauty laughed. The kids have been plotting this for weeks. Amara keeps leaving romantic comedies playing on the TV when we're both in the room. Chidi has been engineering situations where we end up alone together. They've been matchmaking us? Min-jae pulled back, looking delighted and horrified. They're 9 years old. There are 9-year-olds. Of course they're strategic masterminds. And sure, enough. When Beauty and Min-jae sat Chidi and Amara down the next evening to carefully explain that their relationship was evolving, the children exchanged knowing looks. Finally, Amara said, we were starting to think we'd have to make a presentation with data showing why you should date. We actually did make a presentation, Chidi admitted, pulling up a tablet. Want to see it? The presentation was titled, Why Our Parents Should Stop Being Stubborn, a Data-Driven Analysis. It included charts on time spent together, frequency of lingering glances they'd been counting, and a cost-benefit analysis of dating versus continued mutual pining. You made a cost-benefit analysis of our relationship? Beauty asked, torn between mortification and laughter. We're thorough, Chidi said seriously, and statistically, it makes sense. You already cohabit. You work together successfully. You share parental responsibilities. The romantic component is a logical next step. How do you even know about romantic components? Min-jae asked weakly. Internet, Amara said simply. Also, we took a vote. You took a vote? Democratic process? Chidi explained. Me, Amara, and Park Ji-hoon. 3 votes in favor, 0 against. Ji-hoon says you've been ridiculously obvious for months. Min-jae covered his face with his hands. My assistant voted on my love life. He's very invested, Amara said. Also, he thinks Ioma is good for you. You're less grumpy since she started working at the company. Beauty looked at Min-jae, at their children with their spreadsheets and voting tallies, and felt something warm and bright bloom in her chest. This family they were building, messy and unconventional and somehow perfect, was more than she'd ever dared to dream of 5 years ago, when she'd held 2 tiny newborns and wondered how she'd survive. The months that followed were a careful dance of boundaries and stolen moments. At work, they maintained professionalism, though everyone seemed to know anyway. At home, they navigated dating while co-parenting, which meant romantic dinners that got interrupted by homework questions and goodnight kisses that happened in front of two very interested 9-year-olds who rated them on a scale of 1 to 10. That was a 7, Chidi announced after Min-jae kissed Beauty goodbye one morning. Needs more commitment. Less hesitation. I'm taking romance advice from a 4th grader, Min-jae muttered, but he was smiling. Beauty's position at JK Technologies solidified. Her African expansion strategy exceeded projections by 40%. She earned her promotion to VP of International Marketing through results, not relationships, and even the most skeptical board members had to acknowledge her value. When industry publications interviewed her about breaking barriers as a black woman in Korean tech, she spoke honestly about the challenges and the importance of diverse perspectives in global business. And through it all, her relationship with Min-jae deepened in ways that surprised them both. He learned about her childhood in Lagos, about the dreams she'd had before poverty and circumstance narrowed her options. She learned about the pressure he'd felt to succeed, about the loneliness of being raised by a mother who valued achievement over affection, about his terror when he'd been diagnosed with infertility and thought he'd never have a family. I thought I was broken, Min-jae admitted one night, 6 months into their relationship. They were on his penthouse balcony, the children finally asleep inside, Seoul glittering below them. When the doctors said I probably couldn't have children, I felt like I'd failed at the most basic human function. And now? Beauty asked, her hand finding his. Now I have 2 genius kids who regularly outsmart me, and a woman who's brilliant and beautiful and somehow doesn't seem to mind that I'm emotionally stunted and terrible at expressing feelings. He turned to her, serious. Now I feel like maybe miracles are real. You're not terrible at expressing feelings, Beauty said softly. You're just careful with them. That's different. I love you, Min-jae said, and it was the first time he'd said it clearly, without hedging or joking. I love you, Beauty Okonkwo. I loved you 5 years ago when I lost your number and kicked myself for months. I loved you when you walked into my office, fierce and protective and absolutely terrifying. I love you now, watching you conquer my company and raise incredible children and somehow still find patience for me. Beauty felt tears slide down her cheeks. I love you too. Even though you're stubborn and you work too much and your mother hates me. My mother will come around, Min-jae said, though they both knew that was optimistic at best. And if she doesn't, we'll survive. We've survived worse. They had. Beauty had survived being alone and scared and pregnant in a foreign country. Min-jae had survived thinking he'd never have the family he wanted. Together, they'd survived media scrutiny, professional skepticism, and the complications of blending their lives. Marry me, Min-jae said suddenly. Beauty blinked. What? Marry me. Not because it's logical or because of the kids or because it makes things simpler, but because I want to wake up next to you for the rest of my life. Because I want to make this official. Because he pulled out a small box from his pocket, and Beauty realized this wasn't as spontaneous as it seemed. I bought this ring 2 months ago, and I've been carrying it around waiting for the perfect moment. But then I realized every moment with you is perfect. Even the messy ones. Especially the messy ones. The ring was beautiful, a simple band with a single diamond, elegant and understated. Beauty stared at it, at him, at the life they'd somehow built from one night and impossible odds. The kids are going to say they saw this coming, she said through tears. They're probably recording this from inside, Min-jae agreed. So, should I ask properly? He slid off the chair, kneeling on the balcony, still holding that ring. Beauty Okonkwo, would you marry me? Would you take a chance on us? On this complicated, messy, beautiful family we're building? Yes, Beauty said, laughing and crying simultaneously. Yes, you stubborn, romantic, impossible man. Yes. When they kissed, sealing the promise, Beauty heard a cheer from inside the penthouse. Through the glass door, she could see Chidi and Amara high-fiving, clearly having witnessed the entire proposal. Told you they were watching, Min-jae murmured against her lips. I wouldn't have it any other way, Beauty said, and meant it. The wedding was small and intimate, held at the penthouse with only close friends and family. Well, family -1 Kang Hae-jin had declined the invitation with icy civility, making her position clear. But Park Ji-hoon was there, teary-eyed and proud. The children's teachers came, having fallen in love with the brilliant twins. A few of Beauty's Nigerian friends from the immigrant community showed up, bringing food and joy and acceptance. Chidi and Amara stood beside their parents during the vows, each holding a candle that they lit to symbolize the joining of their family. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, Amara raised her hand. Beauty's heart stopped until her daughter said solemnly, "I object to the fact that there's no chocolate cake. Vanilla is suboptimal for celebrations." The tension broke into laughter, and even Min Jae cracked a smile. "We'll get you chocolate cake tomorrow," he promised. "Acceptable," Amara said, satisfied. The vows themselves were simple. Min Jae promised to be present, to listen, to value Beauty's independence even while building their partnership. Beauty promised to trust, to let herself be supported, to stop trying to prove she didn't need help. They both promised to put their family first, to communicate even when it was hard, to remember that they were choosing each other every day. "I promise to love your children as my own," Min Jae said, looking at Chidi and Amara, "because they already are. I promise to build with you, not just for you," Beauty said, "to be your partner in everything." When they kissed as husband and wife, their children cheered, and Beauty felt something settle in her chest. Peace, maybe, or just the certainty that whatever came next, they'd face it together. Life after marriage settled into a new rhythm. Beauty continued excelling at JK Technologies, her team expanding as the company's international presence grew. Min Jae learned to leave work at reasonable hours, to show up for parent-teacher conferences, to actually take weekends off. The children thrived. Chidi, leading his school's robotics team to nationals, Amara winning a youth science competition with a project on sustainable energy. 2 years into their marriage, Beauty discovered she was pregnant. The news shocked them both. Min Jae's infertility diagnosis had been clear, and they'd assumed Chidi and Amara were their only biological possibility. "Another miracle," Min Jae said, his hand on Beauty's still flat stomach, wonder in his voice. "You and your miracles," Beauty teased, but she was crying, overwhelmed by joy and fear and the sheer impossibility of it all. The twins were ecstatic. They immediately began researching infant development, optimal nursery setups, and evidence-based parenting techniques. By Beauty's second trimester, they'd created a comprehensive childcare plan that included feeding schedules, sleep training protocols, and age-appropriate educational stimulation. "You've turned our pregnancy into a science project," Beauty laughed, reading through their detailed presentation. "We're being thorough," Chidi said seriously. "This child will have every advantage." Their daughter was born on a rainy March morning, small and perfect, and screaming with impressive lung power. They named her Grace for the grace they'd been given, for second chances, for the gift of love they didn't deserve but had received anyway. Chidi, now 11, held his baby sister with careful reverence. "She's so small," he whispered. "I forgot babies were this small." Amara peered at Grace's tiny face. "She has Aoma's nose, and Appa's ears. Optimal genetic combination." "You can't optimize genetics," Beauty said, exhausted and euphoric. "We can try," Amara replied cheerfully, watching her husband hold their newborn daughter while their older children debated genetic traits. Beauty felt the same sense of impossible rightness she'd felt at their wedding. This family built from mistakes and miracles, and the courage to try again was everything. Years passed. Grace grew into a curious toddler, then a precocious child who worshipped her older siblings and followed them everywhere. Chidi and Amara entered high school, still brilliant, still close, navigating adolescence with the same analytical approach they applied to everything. Beauty became senior vice president, then executive vice president, her name recognized in international business circles. Min Jae mellowed, learned to delegate, discovered that success meant more than just company growth. One evening, 15 years after those first DNA test results changed everything, the family gathered for dinner. Chidi was home from university for the weekend, already planning his graduate studies. Amara was preparing applications to study abroad. Grace, now 13, was in the middle of her own gifted program phase, asking questions that neither parent could always answer. "Remember when we voted on whether you two should date?" Amara asked suddenly, grinning at her parents. "I remember being mortified by my 9-year-old's PowerPoint presentation," Beauty said dryly. "It was a good presentation," Chidi defended. "Solid data, clear conclusions. You made a pros and cons list." Min-jae said. And we were right, Chidi pointed out. Look how well it turned out. Grace, who'd heard this story approximately 1,000 times, rolled her eyes. You're both so weird. We're strategic, Amara corrected. There's a difference. Beauty looked around the table at her family, her husband, who'd gone from stranger to co-parent to love of her life. Her eldest children, brilliant and strange and absolutely perfect. Her youngest, growing into her own personality with fierce independence. This life they'd built, that had started with one night and a forgotten phone number and 2 determined children refusing to accept absence, was messy and complicated and absolutely beautiful. Thank you, she said suddenly, looking at Chidi and Amara. For finding him, for forcing us all into this, for being brave when I was too scared. You would have figured it out eventually, Chidi said generously. Probably not, Beauty admitted. I was very stubborn. Min-jae teased, earning himself a light smack. As the family dissolved into laughter and bickering over whose turn it was to do dishes, Beauty caught Min-jae's eye across the table. He smiled at her, that private smile that was just hers, and mouthed, I love you. Love you too, she mouthed back. Later that night, after Grace was asleep and the older kids were in their rooms, Beauty and Min-jae sat on that same balcony where he'd proposed all those years ago. Do you ever think about what didn't happen? Beauty asked. About how easily we could have never found each other again. All the time, Min-jae admitted. And then I remember that our children hacked my medical records and tracked me down with the determination of tiny private investigators, and I think maybe we never had a choice. Maybe this was always supposed to happen. You don't really believe in fate, Beauty said. No, Min-jae agreed. But I believe in brave children and second chances, and women who are strong enough to build a life alone, but generous enough to let someone in anyway. You've gotten sentimental in your old age, Beauty teased, but she squeezed his hand. 39 isn't old, Min-jae protested. It is when your oldest child is starting graduate school. They sat in comfortable silence, watching souls sparkle below them. The same city where Beauty had once struggled to pay rent, where Min-jae had built his empire, where 2 children had decided their parents belonged together and made it happen through sheer force of will. Do you think we'll have more surprises? Beauty asked. With this family? Absolutely, Min-jae said. Chidi's probably planning something strategic as we speak. Amara's definitely scheming. Grace is entering the teenage years, which will be its own adventure. And us? We'll figure it out, Min-jae said, pulling her close. Like we always do, together. But even as they sat there, comfortable and secure in their love, challenges loomed on the horizon. Chidi's university research was taking him to uncomfortable places, questioning corporate ethics in ways that might eventually put him at odds with his father's company. Amara's plans to study abroad meant the family splitting up for the first time. Grace was showing signs of the same brilliance as her siblings, but also a rebellious streak that worried them both. And Beauty's latest project, an expansion into West African markets that could revolutionize JK Technologies' international presence, was meeting resistance from the same board members who'd once questioned her hire. They were calling it too ambitious, too risky, though Beauty suspected the real issue was that a black woman wanted to lead the company's most significant expansion yet. Min-jae supported her publicly, but she could see the strain. The board was pressuring him to be more conservative, to pull back, to choose the safe path. And for the first time since they'd married, Beauty wondered if their partnership could survive if their professional visions diverged. Then there was Kang Hae-jin. Min-jae's mother had never accepted Beauty, never acknowledged Grace as her grandchild, never attended family gatherings. She'd recently been diagnosed with a serious illness, and Min-jae was torn between his loyalty to his wife and his desire to reconcile with his mother before it was too late. She wants to see me, Min-jae had admitted last week. Alone. Then go, Beauty had said, even though the thought of him sitting with that woman who'd called her children illegitimate made her stomach twist. She'll say terrible things about you. Probably. But she's your mother and she's sick. You should see her. That conversation hung between them now, unresolved. As did the board situation, as did their children's inevitable departure into their own lives. The future was uncertain in ways it hadn't been for years. They'd built something beautiful, but would it hold when tested by real adversity? when their children no longer needed them as desperately, when professional ambitions clashed, when old wounds reopened, Beauty leaned her head on Minjae's shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent, and chose to trust. They'd survived impossible odds before. They could survive whatever came next. But as Seoul glittered below them, beautiful and indifferent, one question remained. Would love be enough when the next storm came? Or would they discover that miracles, no matter how precious, could still break? Only time would tell. And time, as any parent of teenagers knew, had a way of moving faster than anyone was ready for.